My own father called the FBI to throw me in prison. He stood there with fake tears, telling agents I was a hacker extorting him. The cold steel of handcuffs snapped around my wrists while investors watched with approval. My brother leaned in and whispered, "Enjoy your cell, sis." They thought they won. But they didn't know that by handcuffing me, they signed their own death warrant. Because under federal law, without my license, their company became a criminal syndicate. Want to see my father's face when, a minute later, the handcuffs were put on him? Ladies and gentlemen, the sole mastermind behind the Apex system, my son, Julian. The applause was deafening, a wall of sound that seemed to vibrate through the floor of the Denver ballroom. I stood there, paralyzed, as my father, Arthur, handed the microphone to my brother. Julian, a man who treated high-stakes poker rooms like his second home and couldn't write a single line of clean code, beamed at the crowd. Arthur leaned in close, his stage smile never faltering, and delivered the blow that effectively erased 10 years of my life. "Don't make a scene, Sarah," he whispered, his voice as cold as a mountain winter. "You're just the mechanic. Mechanics don't get equity. Now, smile, or you won't even see a severance package." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply reached into my pocket, pulled out my security badge, and set it gently on the polished walnut table. It made a soft, sharp click that was swallowed by the cheering. Then I turned and walked out. I walked past the venture capitalists, past the vintage champagne, and past the $1.2 billion worth of technology that was about to become nothing more than very expensive paperweights. I sat in my beat-up Subaru, the engine cold, listening to the muffled bass of the celebration thumping through the garage concrete. My name is Sarah. I am 32 years old, and for the last decade, I have been a ghost. Inside that building, they were toasting to the future of Vanguard Biotics. They were celebrating the Class 3 neural prosthetics that could let a paralyzed man run a marathon. But they didn't know how those machines actually worked. They didn't know that every line of code, every safety protocol, and every federal compliance log bore my digital fingerprint. My brother Julian, the supposed architect, couldn't even spell compliance. He was a gambling addict who treated the company accounts like his personal casino. I spent my 20s cleaning up his messes. I worked 18-hour days fixing his errors, covering his tracks, and ensuring our technology didn't accidentally kill someone. I signed every safety log because Julian didn't have the license. I was the safety net that caught him every time he fell. You might ask why I stayed. Why I let them use me for 10 years. It's a question I asked myself every time I drove home alone while they went on vacations I paid for. The truth is a trap of normalized cruelty. My father didn't break me in a day. He chipped away at me slowly, methodically, since I was a child. He taught me that love was a transaction. I was valuable only when I was useful. I remembered being 12, winning the state science fair in Fort Collins. I ran home, bursting with pride, holding the blue ribbon. Arthur didn't even look at it. He just pointed to Julian, who was crying over a broken toy drone. "Fix it, Sarah," he had said. "Your brother is the statue. You are the pedestal. Without you, he falls. So don't you dare move." That was the lesson. I wasn't the art, I was the support structure. I wasn't the star, I was the gravity that kept their world from spinning apart. They trained me to be invisible. They thought I would fade away quietly because that's what pedestals do. But they forgot one thing: if you remove the pedestal, the statue doesn't just look less impressive. It crashes to the ground and shatters into a million pieces. I looked at my hands. These were the hands that wrote the code. These were the hands that secured the safety of thousands of patients. And these were the hands that held the only key to the kingdom. My phone buzzed in my lap. The screen lit up with a notification I had received every single day for 3,600 days. It was time. 5 p.m. The daily automated prompt from the Vanguard central server. The vibration against my thigh was a feeling I knew better than my own heartbeat. Biometric handshake required. Level 5 Administrator. Authorized daily operations. For 10 years, I had pressed the green button without thinking. I pressed it on Thanksgiving while my family ate dinner without me. I pressed it during my best friend's wedding while hiding in a bathroom stall. I pressed it while I had the flu, while I was on dates, and while I was standing at my grandmother's graveside. That button was the leash that kept the billion-dollar dog walking in a straight line. Arthur thought he had stripped me of my power when he took my plastic badge. He forgot that he hadn't just built a company, he had built a kingdom of medical devices that required a licensed monarch to function. And he had just exiled the Queen. I propped my tablet on the steering wheel. The company was live streaming the event. On the screen, Arthur was laughing, clinking his glass against a lead investor's flute. Behind him, the apex mark for prototype arm was performing a delicate piano sonata, its titanium fingers moving with fluid grace. It was a masterpiece. My masterpiece. Zero equity, I whispered. I looked down at my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen. The green button meant safety. It meant swallowing the insult and going home to hope for crumbs of gratitude. The red button meant war. I didn't hesitate. I didn't shake. I pressed decline. On my phone, a new message flashed. Authorization denied. Initiating emergency protocol. I looked back at the tablet. The piano music stopped instantly. The apex arm didn't just slow down, it froze mid-strike, its fingers rigid. The sudden silence in the boardroom was louder than the applause had been. Arthur frowned, tapping his glass, thinking it was a glitch in the program. He turned to the prototype and waved his hand, expecting the motion sensors to pick him up. The arm stayed dead. Then came the sound. A low, rhythmic pulse began to blare from the display console, the mandated alarm for an unsupervised device. The investors stopped drinking. Julian rushed over to the console, his face pale, frantically mashing buttons on a screen he didn't understand. He looked like a child trying to fly a spaceship by banging on the dashboard. A large red banner scrolled across the presentation screen behind them, replacing the company logo. System lockdown. Unauthorized operation. Licensed supervisor missing. All units disabled. Arthur's smile vanished. He spun around, his eyes scanning the crowd for the one person he had just thrown out like trash. I took a sip of my water. The show was just beginning. On the tablet screen, the apex arm was a masterpiece of engineering. My masterpiece. Zero equity, I whispered. I looked down at my phone. My thumb hovered over the glass. The green button meant safety. It meant keeping the peace, swallowing the insult, and going home to hope they might throw me a few crumbs of gratitude later. The red button meant war. I didn't hesitate. I didn't shake. I pressed decline. A new message flashed across my screen. Authorization denied. Initiating emergency protocol. I looked back at the live stream. The piano music stopped instantly. The arm didn't just slow down, it froze mid-strike, its fingers rigid, locked in a protective rigor mortis. The sudden silence in the ballroom was louder than the applause had been. Arthur frowned, tapping his champagne glass again, clearly thinking it was a simple pause in the program. He turned to the prototype and waved his hand, expecting the motion sensors to pick him up. The arm stayed dead. Then came the sound. A low, rhythmic pulse began to blare from the display console. It was the federal mandated alarm for an unsupervised Class 3 device. A relentless, piercing beep. The investors stopped drinking, exchanging confused, sharp glances. Julian rushed over to the console, his face turning a sickly shade of grey. I watched him furiously mashing the screen, trying to bypass a lock he didn't have the clearance to touch. He looked like a child trying to fly a spaceship by banging on the dashboard. A large red banner scrolled across the presentation screen behind them, replacing the company logo. It was crisp, clear, and impossible to ignore. System lockdown. Unauthorized operation. Licensed supervisor missing. All units disabled. Arthur's stage smile vanished. He spun around, his eyes scanning the crowd, looking for the one person he had just thrown out like trash. I took a sip of the lukewarm water in my cup holder. The show was just beginning. The silence in my car was shattered by the ringtone I had assigned to my father, a jarring, repetitive siren. His name flashed on the dashboard screen like a threat. I picked up. I didn't say hello. I didn't have to. His voice was so loud it distorted the car's speakers. I could hear the chaos in the background, investors shouting, chairs scraping against the floor, and the relentless drone of the safety alarm. Turn it back on right now, Sarah. I know you did this. I know you rigged it. I leaned back in my seat, watching Julian on the tablet as he sweated through his expensive suit. I didn't rig anything, Arthur, I said, my voice calm, almost bored. I told you, I'm just the mechanic. And since I don't work there anymore, I can't authorize the safety protocols. Don't give me that technical garbage. He screamed. You sabotaged the fleet. You planted a virus. I will sue you for everything you have. I'll bury you so deep you'll never work in this industry again. It's not a virus, I corrected him. It's a feature. Specifically, it's the 24-hour supervisor mandate required for Class 3 medical devices. Without a licensed administrator to biometrically sign the logs, the system defaults to safe mode to prevent patient injury. It's not sabotage, Dad. It's the law. I don't care about the law. He roared. I have investors here. I have $1 billion deal on the table. Fix it. There was a scuffling sound, and then my mother's voice came on the line. She was crying, that breathless, high-pitched sob she used whenever she wanted to manipulate me. Sarah, please, Cynthia begged. How could you do this? How could you be so cruel to your brother? This was his big night. He needs this win. Why are you trying to destroy this family? I closed my eyes for a second. There was the classic pivot. When threats failed, they switched to guilt. They didn't care that Arthur had just fired me and erased a decade of my work. They only cared that I was ruining the party. I didn't destroy the family, Mom, I said. You did, when you sat there and watched Dad give my life's work to a gambling addict. You chose your side. We gave you a job. She shrieked, the mask finally slipping. We fed you. We let you play scientist in that lab. And this is how you repay us? By embarrassing us? Give me the phone. Arthur snatched it back. His breathing was ragged, panicked. Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat. I want the override code right now. Give me the password and maybe, just maybe, I won't call the police. I looked at my hand again. The thumb that had pressed decline. There is no password, Arthur, I said. It's a biometric key. It scans the unique vascular pattern of a licensed engineer's thumbprint. Specifically, my thumbprint. Then get back here, he demanded. Get in here and unlock it. I can't do that, I said. Why the hell not? Because you fired me, I said. And as you so clearly pointed out, mechanics don't get equity. So, unless you're planning to sign over 50% of the company in the next 5 minutes, my thumb stays with me. You can't do this, he stammered, the reality finally sinking in. You can't just walk away with the keys to $1 billion company. I just did, I said. Good luck with the investors, Dad. I hear they hate surprises. I tapped the end call icon. The connection severed, and the siren finally stopped. On the tablet, I watched as the lead investor stood up, buttoned his charcoal jacket, and walked out of the room without a word. Arthur chased after him, grabbing his arm, desperate, pathetic. I put the car in gear. I wasn't going home. I was going back. Not to fix it, but to finish it. I walked back into the lobby of Vanguard Biotics. The security guard, old Mr. Miller, couldn't look me in the eye. He just buzzed me through the turnstile with a shaking hand, his gaze fixed on his monitors. I took the elevator up to the penthouse floor. I expected lawyers. I expected a settlement offer. I expected Arthur to slide a piece of paper across the table with a number followed by too many zeros, trying to buy back his dignity. I was naive. I forgot that when you corner a narcissist, they don't negotiate. They annihilate. The boardroom doors were wide open. The atmosphere inside was heavy, suffocating. The remaining investors were still there, sitting in a tense, graveyard silence. Julian was leaning against the far wall, scrolling on his phone with an air of practiced boredom. Arthur stood at the head of the table. He wasn't sweating anymore. He wasn't screaming. He was calmly adjusting his cufflinks. He looked too composed. I'm here, I said, stepping into the room. Let's talk about the equity I was denied. Arthur looked up. He didn't smile. Instead, he wore a mask of such profound sadness that for a split second, I almost believed it myself. I'm sorry, Sarah, he said softly. I really didn't want it to end like this. End like what? I asked. He simply nodded toward the side door. It burst open instantly. 4 men in dark windbreakers stormed in. They didn't move like corporate lawyers. They moved with the aggressive, practiced precision of law enforcement. On the back of their jackets, bold yellow letters caught the light, FBI. My blood ran cold. Sarah Vance? The lead agent barked, crossing the room in 3 long strides. Hands where I can see them. What is this? I asked, backing away until I hit the edge of the table. I didn't do anything. We have a sworn affidavit from the CEO of Vanguard Biotics alleging corporate espionage, wire fraud, and the deployment of malicious ransomware, the agent said. He grabbed my wrist, spinning me around with a forceful jerk. I looked at Arthur. He was shaking his head, playing the role of the devastated father to perfection. He held up a thick manila folder for the agents to see. She rigged the system, Arthur told them, his voice trembling with manufactured emotion. We have the logs. She planted a virus to hold the company hostage. She demanded 50% of the shares to unlock it. It's extortion. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around my wrists. The sound seemed to echo in the silent room. I stood there, physically restrained, while the people I had served for a decade watched with cold eyes. The lead investor looked at me with pure disgust. To them, I wasn't the architect anymore. I was just a bitter, unstable ex-employee trying to burn the building down on my way out. I didn't plant a virus, I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to stay calm. It's a safety protocol. Check the code. Save it for the judge, the agent said, tightening the cuffs. Julian pushed off the wall and sauntered over to me, a smug grin spreading across his face. He leaned in close, so close I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. I told you, sis, he whispered. Dad's always one step ahead. You think you can steal my company? Enjoy prison. My mother, Cynthia, was sitting in the corner. She wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at the floor, refusing to witness the monster they had created. Arthur, I said, looking directly at my father. You know this is a lie. You know I didn't rig anything. We try to help you, Sarah, Arthur said loudly, performing for the agents. We gave you a job. We gave you a purpose. And this is how you betray us. The agent shoved me forward. Let's go. As they marched me toward the door, my mind was racing. They had planned this. They knew they couldn't beat me technically, so they had decided to bury me legally. They had framed me, turning my own safety measures into a weapon against me. I watched the prototypes, still frozen, still flashing a rhythmic, warning red. Arthur thought arresting me solved his problem. He believed that with me in a cell, he could finally force the keys from my hand. He didn't realize that by calling the authorities, he hadn't just framed me, he had walked directly into a federal trap he didn't even know existed. The agent began reading me my rights, the words a hollow drone against the chaos of the room, but I kept my eyes on the flashing message behind my father's head, System Lockdown. Fed Protocol 21-11. Arthur was practically glowing with the heat of his victory. He had stolen my work, erased my name from the company, and now planned to use a prison cell to finish the job. But he had forgotten one crucial factor, the lead investor. Wait, the investor said, standing up and pointing a trembling finger at the presentation screen. That error code. That's not a virus. The room went still. Even the FBI agents paused, looking from the billionaire to the screen. It's federal compliance, the investor continued, his voice dropping an octave. I recognize that string. Agent, search 21 CFR Part 11. Right now. When the agent checked his handheld device, the truth unfolded with devastating speed. By removing me, the only licensed regulatory supervisor on the payroll, Arthur had effectively forced the facility to operate outside of federal law. In the eyes of the government, every second the machines ran without my biometric oversight was a felony. Check the internal logs, I said, my voice steady now. They aren't hacks. They're my mandatory safety audits. Look at the entries from the last 6 months. The investigation shifted in real time. As the agents accessed the server through the terminal, they didn't find a virus. They found the real scandal. Julian had been systematically overriding safety limits and falsifying clinical data to artificially boost the stock price before the buyout. That was the real reason they had fired me. I was the only one who wouldn't let the lie stand. The lead investor looked at the data and exploded. $1 billion investment had been built on a foundation of systemic fraud. Moments later, the cold steel was unlocked from my wrists. The sound of the handcuffs snapping onto Arthur and Julian was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. 3 months later, Vanguard Biotics was a memory. The company had been seized, liquidated, and driven into a rapid, messy bankruptcy. Julian took a plea deal and went to prison. My mother, true to form, abandoned the sinking ship and started calling me, begging for money and crying about family loyalty. I blocked her number without a second thought. I returned to the old headquarters only once, to buy back my own specialized equipment at the liquidation auction for my new firm. Arthur was there, out on bail and looking 10 years older. He was screaming at the movers as they stripped his mahogany office bare. Looking at him then, it finally hit me. His power had never been real. It was just noise masqueraded as authority, a house of cards held together by my silence. Without the money and the prestige, he was a small, bitter man shouting at shadows. He tried to command me one last time, his finger shaking as he pointed toward the door. I didn't even hear what he said. I simply turned and walked away. Outside, the Colorado sunlight hit my face as I sat in my car and unlocked the servers for my own business. My name. My license. My future. Sometimes the only way to move forward is to let the corrupt system collapse and build something better on the ruins.